Ever wondered which airline is a better investment, Delta Airlines or American Airlines? As we embark on this financial journey, we'll be comparing two of the leading airlines in the United States. Delta Airlines, a major player in the aviation industry, and American Airlines, another titan of the skies. But before we take off, it's essential to understand the financials of these companies. Why, you ask? Because knowing your investment inside out is the key to successful investing. It's like the pre-flight check before a plane takes off. You wouldn't want to board a flight that hasn't been thoroughly inspected, would you? Similarly, you wouldn't want to invest in a company without understanding its financial health. So, buckle up and prepare for takeoff as we delve into the numbers, compare the financials, and evaluate the investment potential of these two airlines. Stay tuned as we go through the data to determine which airline presents a better investment opportunity. First, let's talk revenue. How much money are these companies bringing in? Let's begin with the basics. In the third quarter of 2023, Delta Airlines reported total revenues of $44 billion, whereas American Airlines brought in a slightly lower figure of $40 billion. Now let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture. Over the past 5 years, Delta has seen a compound annual growth rate, or CAGR, of 5% in its revenues. American Airlines, on the other hand, experienced a slightly lower growth rate of 3%. When we break down the revenue by source, we find that 84% of Delta's revenues come from passenger revenue, with the remaining 16% derived from other sources. American Airlines shows a similar trend, with 92% of its revenues from passenger revenue, and the remaining 8% from other sources. Let's add another dimension to our analysis and examine the revenue breakdown by region. For Delta, 70% of its revenues come from domestic flights. The remaining 30% is split among Atlantic, Latin, and Pacific routes, contributing 19%, 7%, and 4% respectively. For American Airlines, 65% of its revenues come from domestic flights, with the remaining 35% distributed among Latin America, Atlantic, and other regions, contributing 13%, 12%, and 10% respectively. Clearly, both airlines have diverse revenue streams, but Delta seems to have a slight edge. It holds a slightly higher total revenue, a faster growth rate, and a more diversified source of revenue. However, it's important to note that these figures are only one piece of the puzzle. In the next section, we'll delve deeper into their profit analysis to get a clearer picture of their financial health and performance. Stay tuned as we continue our comparative analysis of Delta Airlines and American Airlines, two of the largest airlines in the United States. So far, Delta seems to be leading the race, but as any seasoned investor knows, the game is far from over. Profitability is a key factor in any investment decision. So, how profitable are these airlines? Let's delve into the numbers. Delta Airlines flaunts a net profit margin of 6%, a significant rise from their 5-year average of negative 10%. On the other hand, American Airlines has a net profit margin of 2%, an improvement from their 5-year average of negative 8%. Although these net profit margins may seem modest, it's important to remember that the airline industry is known for its slim margins due to high operational costs. In terms of net profit growth rates, the 3 quarters of 2023 saw Delta Airlines with a net profit of $2.6 billion and American Airlines with a net profit of $0.8 billion. If we compare this to the same 3 quarters in 2018, Delta Airlines has seen a compound annual growth rate, CAGR, of negative 2%, while American Airlines has seen a CAGR of negative 6% over the past 5 years. Let's not forget the elephant in the room, the COVID-19 pandemic. The year 2020 was a harsh one for the entire aviation industry. Delta Airlines reported a net loss of negative $6.7 billion, while American Airlines saw a net loss of negative $11.6 billion. These losses were primarily due to the drastic drop in passenger demand caused by global lockdowns and travel restrictions. So, what do these numbers tell us? It's clear that Delta Airlines has a higher net profit margin compared to American Airlines. However, both airlines have faced significant challenges in maintaining profitability over the past 5 years, with the COVID-19 pandemic exacerbating these issues. Delta has a higher net profit margin, but both airlines have struggled with profitability in the past 5 years. Let's turn our attention to the asset side of the balance sheet. Assets are a crucial part of any business, and for airlines, they include everything from airplanes to the cash in the bank. For Delta Airlines, the total assets at the end of the third quarter of 2023 amounted to $73 billion. American Airlines, on the other hand, had a total of $66 billion in assets. This represents a significant difference in the asset base of both airlines, with Delta having a $7 billion lead. Now, let's look at net assets. Net assets, also known as equity, is what's left after subtracting liabilities from total assets. It's essentially the value that would be left for shareholders if a company was liquidated. In Delta's case, the net assets stood at $9 billion at the end of the third quarter of 2023. American Airlines, however, presented a very different picture with negative net assets of $5 billion. This negative equity position implies that American's liabilities exceed its assets, which is not a particularly comforting sight for investors. The current ratio is another key indicator of a company's financial health. It measures a company's ability to cover its short-term liabilities with its short-term assets. A ratio less than 1 could suggest potential liquidity issues. As of the third quarter of 2023, Delta's current ratio was 0.44, while American's was slightly better, at 0.69. Lastly, let's talk about accounts receivable days. This metric indicates how long it takes a company to collect cash from its credit sales. For airlines, this is typically low, as most tickets are paid for upfront. Delta's accounts receivable days stood at 20 days, while American's was even lower at 14 days, showing faster cash collection. While American Airlines has a slightly better current ratio, Delta has a stronger asset base. This comparison provides a fascinating insight into the financial health and operational efficiency of these two airlines. Cash is king in any business, so how are these airlines doing in terms of cash flow? In the third quarter of 2023, Delta Airlines reported an operating cash flow of $5.9 billion. That's the money their core business activities brought in before any capital expenditures. On the other hand, American Airlines reported an operating cash flow of $5.2 billion, slightly less than Delta. However, when we look at free cash flow, which is the cash a company generates after accounting for capital expenditures, it's a different story. Delta reported a free cash flow of $2.2 billion, while American Airlines reported a higher free cash flow of $3 billion. This shows that American Airlines was more efficient at converting its operating cash flow into free cash flow. Now let's discuss the OCF to net income ratios. This ratio gives us an idea of how a company's cash flow from operations compares to its net income. The higher the ratio, the more cash a company is generating compared to its reported net income. For Delta, the ratio was 2.3, indicating that its operating cash flow was 2.3 times its net income. On the other hand, American Airlines had a ratio of 6.5, showing a significant amount of cash being generated compared to net income. What does this all mean? Well, both airlines are generating a healthy amount of cash from their operations. However, American Airlines seems to be more efficient at converting its operating cash flow into free cash flow and is generating a significantly higher amount of cash compared to its net income, as indicated by its higher OCF to net income ratio. In conclusion, while both airlines are doing well in terms of cash flow, American Airlines seems to have a slight edge here. But remember, cash flow is just one aspect of a company's financial health. It's always important to look at the full picture before making any investment decisions. Both airlines have strong cash flows, but American Airlines seems to have a slight edge here. Finally, let's perform a DuPont analysis to understand the return on equity. The ROE of Delta Airlines in the third quarter of 2023 was 37%. This is derived from a net profit margin of 6%, an asset turnover of 0.8, and an asset-to-equity ratio of 7.94. On the flip side, American Airlines had a negative ROE of negative 21%. This was due to a net profit margin of 2%, an asset turnover of 0.81, and a negative asset-to-equity ratio of negative 12.79. The negative ROE for American Airlines is primarily due to negative shareholder equity. So as we can see, the return on equity for these two airlines is significantly different. Delta has a positive ROE, while American Airlines has a negative ROE due to negative shareholder equity.